This is episode 350 of That Shakespeare Life. Just like the work of William Shakespeare, That Shakespeare Life is supported by our patrons. Listeners just like you can support the work we do here and access special insider extras, including the chance to participate in the making of our show. Learn more at patreon.com/thatshakespearelife and stay tuned for even more details.
Hi, I'm Julia Lupton, professor of English at the University of California, Irvine, and the author of Shakespeare Dwelling. Another great method for studying the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend Cassidy Cash.
One of the places man-made, which were also very much used to skate, but of course rivers, ponds, lakes were the most usual places to skate.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
William Shakespeare's lifetime occurs right in the middle of what's known as the Little Ice Age. And this was when it got extremely cold in England during the wintertime, causing the rivers and the lakes to absolutely freeze over solid, offering an opportunity for things like ice skating, as well as transportation across these frozen rivers, because merchants still had to find a way to sell their wares despite their roadway being blocked by a frozen river. In addition to using the rivers and lakes in a practical way, sports and entertainment were often hosted on the frozen rivers and lakes, including skating and other sports that were practiced on the ice. Here today to share with us the history of these sports, the archaeological information we have about them, as well as what we know about the physical skates that were used to accomplish these activities, is our guest and historian of sports and leisure in the early modern period, Tomas Masar. Tomas Masar is a historian from the Department of Germanic Studies at the Faculty of Arts, Charles University in Prague. He works on 19th and 20th century history of Central and Northern Europe, the history of national movements and revivals, and the history of sports and leisure from the early modern period, as well as from the modern period. He recently contributed chapters to the textbook, The European Experience, a multi-perspective history of modern Europe from 1500 to 2000, and he's written an article that included the history of ice skating from the early modern period, and that's what he joins us to discuss today. You can find links to Tomas's work in the show notes for today's episode. Before we dive into the history today, I want to let you know that there is bonus history content related to our conversation today, including some visual elements like 16th and 17th century paintings, some links to museum artifacts, pictures of some of those ice skates we're talking about straight from the 16th and 17th century, and all kinds of extra research like primary documents and articles that you'll find interesting if you enjoy this topic. So if you'd like to explore all the visual history while you're listening today, then use the Patreon button located on our show notes page. The show notes for this week is CassidyCash.com/episode 350. And while you're there, if you click the Patreon button, you can either join us as a patron or log in if you're already a supporter of our show. And all of these extras will expand right on the website. And now let's dive into the history. Hello, Tomas. Welcome to That Shakespeare Life.
Hello, thanks for inviting me.
In Shakespeare's England, what locations were most popular for ice skating? Was it always a frozen river or a lake, or were there ever any kind of man-made skating locations?
Well, it usually was a frozen lake or frozen river, but in 17th century, it was also quite usual that people were skating on those like garden canals, where the canals were frozen during the winter. It was also kind of coincidence that the fashion of garden canals came from like France and Netherlands in the 17th century, in the same time when the fashion of skating came in England. So I guess the frozen canals was like one of the places man-made, which were also very much used to skate. But of course, rivers, ponds, lakes were the most usual places to skate.
Were the first ice skates made of bone?
Yeah, historians are pretty much sure that the first skates were made of bones, usually from like horse bones, this like horse legs or ribs. It can be also from like deers, oxes, sheep. There are some theories that even the name of skate is coming from like either Old German or Old Dutch, from words like schenkel, which should mean the leg bone of animal. So most of the like earliest skates we know are made of bones. There may be some made of wood as well, but I guess that the earliest or the oldest ones are from bones.
When did skates start to be made from metal or iron? Would there have been any metal or iron ones from Shakespeare's lifetime, or was that much later?
Actually, it was already earlier in like 13th, 14th century in Dutch countries, in Netherlands, Flanders. They started to add some like metal blades to the skates. And this changed very much the way how they were skating. Because with the old like bone skates, they usually were kind of like gliding on the ice, and they needed some like stick or pole to push themselves to move. With the blades, the like metal blades, they managed to skate without those poles, without sticks. The technique was almost the same we use nowadays. Sometimes it's called Dutch roll, the movement. It was much easier to move, and for people who know how to skate with those blades, it was quite efficient.
In one painting that you share in your article on early modern sports, and I think the painting is dated to the first half of the 17th century. The people in the image appear to be holding hockey sticks, like it's curved at the end and they're holding it down towards the ice. And in a similar painting I found from this same period, it's called People Playing Golf. So like golf, but spelled with a C. Was golf on the ice, or essentially hockey, was this played in Shakespeare's lifetime as a precursor to what we think of hockey as today?
I think golf as a sport invented in Netherlands once again because the Dutch people were those who were skating quite a lot, and so we have lots of pictures from like Dutch masters in 17th century depicting skating people or doing some like winter sports on ice. But to return to golf, it was a sport which was more similar to nowadays golf. In fact, sometimes it's called that it's even like a Dutch version of golf. They were basically hitting the ball to get as close to some target as possible. It was played on streets, in parks, and in winter times on frozen rivers, canals, lakes.
Anywhere they could pick up a game.
Yep. Actually, I think it's more close to golf than ice hockey.
Well, what about other ice and snow sports? I think about skiing, for example. Would people in the 16th and 17th century have gone skiing?
Well, yeah, definitely. Skiing was also like usual way how to move in winter times. It's basically the same like movement or very similar movements to skating, and it comes as skating from Northern Europe. So nowadays, Scandinavia, Finland, Northern Russia. It's also very old, like from like several centuries before Christ. I think one of the first skis is supposed to be like 5,000 years old. So in 16th, 17th century, skiing was very usual especially in Northern Europe, in Norway, nowadays Norway, Sweden, Finland. I'm not sure how much skiing was like sport done or something done in Shakespeare's England. That would depend on the like weather conditions, if there was snow enough. But we know that the knowledge of skiing spread to continental Europe already like in early modern times. So I guess it's possible that people were skiing, but I would say that more in the northern parts of the Europe where there was snow enough.
So it existed during Shakespeare's lifetime, but sounds like there's a question about whether or not it was popular in England specifically because we don't know how much snow they had necessarily at different times. I know some people doing research into weather data at this moment that are going to love that we pose that question because now they can run with that. But that's an interesting distinction to make, I think, because the metal skates that you referenced earlier that the Dutch were using, was that present in England, or was that something that existed during this time frame in the Netherlands, but not necessarily in Shakespeare's England?
I think the whole fashion of skating came in England a bit later on with the restoration of Charles II.
Okay.
Because it was very popular in Netherlands. And as Charles spent part of his exile in Netherlands and in France, he actually and his court, his people around him brought the fashion of skating to England. We have sources mentioning that there were people using those bone skates already before in England. In 12th, 13th century, there are some chronics mentioning it, that there were people skating in Canterbury near the grave of Thomas Becket and so on. But the real fashion came with the late Stuarts in second half of the 17th century.
There are other paintings I was able to find from the 16th century where people are seen pushing themselves around the ice on what look like small sleds, as well as larger sleds that look like, carriage-sized sleds. They're even being pulled by a horse. Was the ice thick enough to support a horse-drawn sled in England? And would a frozen river have been used for something like transportation, for example, as well as entertainment, I assume? But would this have been kind of a roadway or a passageway during the winter?
Yes, for sure. Once again, the Dutch people were those who were mostly practicing this, as they were very skilled merchants. And when during the winter the rivers and canals in Netherlands were frozen, they need to transport their goods. So they used those sledges, skates, whatever. This period of early modern times was a bit colder than later 19th or 20th century. Sometimes it's called the Little Ice Age. This scientists are not sure about the exact datation, when it started, when it ended, but mostly it's labeling the period from let's say 13th, 14th century till 18th century. So Shakespeare time was definitely a period when the rivers were frozen enough to be used as transportation ways. There are even sources mentioning that the seas, Baltic Sea, was completely frozen in 14th century for some winters. Huge water services were very much frozen during the winter times in most of the, let's say, northern parts of Europe or above the Mediterranean.
A lot of what we know about ice skates and ice skating does come from museum artifacts that have surviving pieces of these skates. Can you tell us about which museums have some of these artifacts and how we can go and see them?
Naturally, it's very much in the Northern Europe, in museums in Norway, in Sweden, in Finland. As I know, there is a huge collection of those very old skates in Nordiska Museet in Stockholm. There is one museum dedicated completely to ice skating in Oslo, in Norway. It's more about modern skating, but they also have some collections of those old skates. But you can find them almost everywhere in Europe, and even in United States, in Canada. There is some collection in Metropolitan Museum in New York. There is in Museum of London. There are some skates. I just found recently that there was an article from my home country, from city Přerov, which is in the eastern part of the Czech Republic, that in March this year they found some 1,000-year-old bone skates, which I guess will be located in the museum in that town. I think that you can find those old skates almost all over the Europe, but of course much more in northern parts where skating was more used as a transportation mean.
It's exciting to think about Shakespeare's England, knowing about or even enjoying some of these things like skating on the ice or having a horse-drawn carriage go across the river when it's frozen. I know we would like to explore this history further and learn about what parts of Europe had this maybe more and what all was going on. What resources can you recommend for us to use if we're new to this topic and we'd like to learn more?
There are books and articles about ice skating. One article which I found like really fascinating is about the human locomotion on ice, where the Italian physiologist Federico Formetti and Alberto Minetti are like making research comparing those very old skates from bones, from woods with the first blades to modern skates, and somehow comparing the efficiency of the move, how much energy you save when you are skating, and so on. Maybe even a bit return to your like previous questions, not to be that much Europe-centric. Of course, there are archaeological findings of skates also outside of Europe. So in like China, especially in Manchuria, and in Asia, in Siberia, in Russia, there are also skates from bones which were found there. And there are even some hypotheses that there might be some links between those areas in Asia and in Northern America and in Europe, which somehow were connected. So the transfer of knowledge about the skates maybe was like spreaded through those like northern hemisphere parts of Europe, Asia, and in America. Yeah, I would say it's your question.
These are fun resources, and I think we're excited to explore this further. I know I'm excited to see the difference in the efficiency of the moves between bone skates, wood skates, and the modern skates, and just see that compared. We'll place links to these resources as well as links to Tomas's work in the show notes for today's episode. So stay tuned for the URL for where to find those. Tomas, we ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and that's, what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I'm supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible. So your choice would be in addition to those.
Can I take two books because they are just like...
Yes, I think you can.
Yeah, they are from the same author, and they are basically published usually as a one book.
Okay. As
I'm really into 19th century, it will be Three Men in a Boat and Three Men on Wheels from Jeremy Klapka Jeremy.
Okay. Well, I think you'll be well set up there. Yes. And you should be able to take part 1 and part 2, I think. So that makes sense.
Thanks.
Well, what's next for you? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
I've just recently made some research with my colleagues from University in Helsinki about the bilateral contacts between Northern and Central Europe. So I hope we will continue on this. I'm planning to make more research about sports and especially leisure time in 19th century, how people use their free time to just like relax, to have fun, and of course to do sports. And also, as one of my fields is like national movements, I try to find what's like ideas people focused on when constructing their national identities, and even how they use sports to somehow strengthen the national identity, to bond with other people from the same nation.
That sounds exciting. So much fun stuff. Tomas Masar, thank you so much for being here this week and helping us explore the wintry fun of ice skates and skating and frozen rivers for Shakespeare's lifetime. This has been a fun look into what wintertime would have been like during the life of William Shakespeare, and we appreciate you taking time to be here and share it with us.
Thanks very much for inviting me. It was really great fun to share the knowledge about the skating with you.
The list of resources and recommendations we've been talking about today, all of the books and links to Tomas's work and other research tidbits that you've heard us mention, are all packed into a list on the show notes page for today's episode. You can find these things at CassidyCash.com/episode 350. That's CassidyCash.com/EP350. If you love the history that you learn about here on the show and you'd like to go one step further and really try out some of the history that we talk about here on the podcast, then you will love Experience Shakespeare. Experience Shakespeare is our activity tier available on Patreon that allows patrons to try out games, recipes, and crafts straight from the 16th and 17th century, along with history guides that walk you through how these activities connect with Shakespeare's plays and with specific episodes of our podcast. You've got step-by-step tutorials, video instructions, and so much more that let you complete card games, recipes, build things. We've got iron gall ink and calligraphy classes, so much more, all packed into the Experience Shakespeare tier on Patreon. So if you would like to dive into the history and try it out for yourself, then check out Experience Shakespeare at patreon.com/thatshakespearelife. That's patreon.com/thatshakespearelife. That's it for this week. Thank you for listening. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.